Have you ever contemplated the implications of a world divided by ideology, teetering on the brink of nuclear annihilation? The Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension that spanned nearly half a century, was just that. It was an era where two superpowers, the capitalist West and the communist East, stood toe-to-toe, their ideologies clashing and reshaping the world in ways we still feel today. This was no ordinary conflict. It was a war of attrition, fought not on battlefields but in the minds and hearts of people across the globe. Nuclear weapons, symbols of unimaginable destruction, played a significant role, casting a long shadow over international relations. The impact of this ideological face-off rippled through the corridors of global politics, redefining power dynamics and shaping the world order. Now, let us delve into the fascinating chronology of this historical period. From the early seeds of discord to the eventual dissolution, let's explore the Cold War in all its intricate detail. The Cold War was a silent storm brewing at the close of World War II. As the dust of the Second World War began to settle in 1945, the seeds of a new conflict were sown. At the Yalta Conference, a meeting of the minds between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, the leaders of these powerful nations made key decisions about the post-war world. They agreed to demand Germany's unconditional surrender, divided it into 4 zones of occupation, and vowed to hunt down and prosecute war criminals. Yet, beneath the surface of these agreements, a rift was beginning to form. Fast forward a few months to the Potsdam Conference, where the division of Germany and Berlin was formalized. This division was more than just geographical. It symbolized the ideological divide between the democratic West and the communist East. This divide quickly became known as the Iron Curtain, a term coined by Winston Churchill in a 1946 speech. The Iron Curtain was not a physical wall, but a metaphorical one, representing the divide between the democratic nations of the West and the communist nations of the East. As the 1940s came to a close, the world saw the establishment of 2 major military alliances. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed by 12 Western nations, including the United States, Canada, and several countries in Western Europe. Its counterpart in the East, the Warsaw Pact, was established a few years later by the Soviet Union and its satellite states. These 2 alliances were the major players in the Cold War, each side armed to the teeth and ready to defend its way of life. The division of Germany, the creation of the Iron Curtain, and the formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact marked the beginnings of the Cold War. This period of geopolitical tension, which lasted from 1947 to 1991, was characterized by a tense standoff between the world's superpowers. It was a silent war, fought not on the battlefield but in the realms of ideology, economics, and technology. The stage was set for a decades-long tug-of-war between the world's superpowers. As the 1960s dawned, the Cold War was escalating in a dangerous manner. The world was poised on the edge, a precarious balance maintained by the 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was a terrifying example of just how close the world came to nuclear war. The Soviet Union had installed nuclear weapons in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States shores. For 13 nerve-wracking days, the world held its breath as the US and the USSR engaged in a tense standoff. It was a clear demonstration of the dangerous game of brinkmanship that characterized the Cold War. In a different arena, the space race was also heating up. Both superpowers were desperate to prove their technological superiority. The Soviets shocked the world when they sent the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into space in 1961. Not to be outdone, the United States put the first man on the moon in 1969, a feat that remains unrivaled to this day. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War was raging. The US, fearing the spread of communism, was heavily involved in this conflict, which was a proxy war in the larger Cold War. It was a brutal and protracted conflict, lasting from 1955 to 1975. The Vietnam War highlighted the ideological divide and the lengths both superpowers were willing to go to prevent the other's ideology from spreading. The Berlin Wall, erected in 1961, became a physical symbol of the ideological divide between East and West. It divided the city of Berlin in two, with the Communist East on one side and the Democratic West on the other. The wall would stand for almost 3 decades, its fall in 1989 marking a significant turning point in the Cold War. The world watched with bated breath, waiting for the next move in this high-stakes chess game. The Cold War, like all conflicts, had to come to an end. The seeds of this end were sown by the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. Taking the reins of power in 1985, Gorbachev was different from his predecessors. He was a reformer, a believer in change, and he introduced 2 major policies that would drastically alter the course of the Soviet Union, and in turn, the Cold War. The first of these policies was glasnost, or openness. This policy called for increased transparency and freedom of speech within the Soviet Union. For the first time in decades, Soviet citizens could openly criticize the government and its policies, a previously unthinkable act. This newfound freedom led to a surge of dissatisfaction and unrest among the Soviet people, igniting the spark that would eventually burn down the Iron Curtain. The second policy, perestroika, meant restructuring. Gorbachev aimed to overhaul the Soviet economic and political systems, moving away from strict central planning towards a more market-based economy. But these reforms were too little, too late. The Soviet economy was already in a state of collapse, and perestroika only hastened its downfall. As the Soviet Union crumbled from within, the satellite states of Eastern Europe saw their chance. One by one, they broke away from the Soviet Union, with the Berlin Wall's fall in 1989 serving as a symbolic end to the Cold War. It was a momentous event watched by the entire world, as the literal and figurative wall dividing East and West was torn down. Finally, on the 25th of December 1991, the Soviet Union was officially dissolved. The red flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time, and the Russian Federation was born. Communism in Eastern Europe had come to an end. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief as the Cold War came to an unexpected end. The Cold War might be over, but its impact is still felt today. This period of geopolitical tension that lasted for nearly 5 decades has left a profound imprint on our world, shaping international relations, politics, and culture in ways we are still unpacking. The Cold War, a tussle between 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, has fundamentally shaped the global power dynamics we see today. The world was effectively split into 2 blocks, each with its sphere of influence. This bipolar world order continues to influence international relations, even as new powers emerge on the global stage. But the impacts of the Cold War go beyond the geopolitical. It also ushered in a new era of politics. It was a time of ideological warfare where capitalism and communism were pitted against each other. This ideological divide has had a lasting impact, shaping political discourse and policy-making to this day. From the way we view economic inequality to debates on the role of government, the echoes of this ideological clash are still heard in our political conversations. And then there's the cultural impact. The Cold War permeated every aspect of society, from literature and film to sports and science. The space race, the proliferation of spy novels, the politicization of the Olympics, these are all remnants of a time when 2 superpowers were vying for cultural dominance. Even more, the Cold War has left a legacy of suspicion and fear. The threat of nuclear war, the fear of the other, the culture of surveillance and propaganda, they've all left a mark on our collective psyche. This sense of fear and distrust continues to shape our responses to global crises, from terrorism to cybersecurity. In understanding the Cold War, we gain a clearer perspective of our present and the path we tread towards the future. It's a reminder that our world today is built on the foundations of our past, and that understanding history is key to navigating our way forward. The Cold War was a complex and multifaceted period in our history. Spanning roughly 5 decades, it was a time of high tension and fierce rivalry between the 2 superpowers of the world, the United States and the Soviet Union. This era, characterized by the threat of nuclear warfare, saw major events like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the space race, which not only intensified the competition but also shaped the world as we know it. The Cold War influenced global politics, economies, and societies, leaving lasting effects that are felt to this day. The collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War, but its legacy continues to echo in our contemporary world. From the creation of NATO to the current geopolitical landscape, the impact of the Cold War is undeniable. Remember, history is not just about the past. It's a guidebook to understanding our present and shaping our future.